You're listening to The Modern Workforce, a Scheduler podcast. This is a show for deskless workforce innovators, thinkers, advocates, and educators. You're about to hear an interview about frontline worker focus, trends in the mobile workforce, and more. Let's get into the show.
So before we get started, I really wanted to mention today that we're podcasting from beautiful Studio Pod Media studio in San Francisco's Mission District. Always sunny in the Mission, right? So to learn more about Studio Pod Media, please visit studiopodmedia.com. So one thing that's definitely changed for those of us who work at a desk is what we're doing more of. We're working at home, obviously. We're traveling to conferences a little bit less, so I think conferences are actually coming back. And we're eating less lunch in the office. And from the looks of my sink right now, which is full of dishes, not only I'm eating at home, but I'm cooking, and there's just a ton more dishes. So it got me really wondering what changed for all the workers and companies and students and folks who used to eat in groups together. Those companies that make and serve that food, what really happened to their business, right? Also, what happened to folks who care for folks in the home who can't cook their own meals. So I do think that the office, the school, and the conference world is served by some of those companies. And today I'm really honored to have as my guest Brent Bloomberg. He is the Chief Transformation Officer at Sodexo North America. And Sodexo, if you haven't heard of them, they have about 400,000 employees. They do just this. They help serve folks all around the world healthy meals on time and at scale. And they're a world leader in catering, as you might imagine, facilities management, employee benefits, and they even actually have a home service business for about 100 million consumers daily in 55 countries. So welcome, Brent.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So 100 million consumers every day. That's amazing.
Yes. And you know, something that you said even in the intro is, for folks that maybe haven't heard of Sodexo, I actually think that there are probably most of your listeners and most of us in the community out there haven't heard of Sodexo, even though it's one of the world's largest employers, and we are present in the majority of hospitals and universities and schools and office buildings in the US. And it's because we represent our clients. So we represent these universities, these sports stadiums and hospitals on a daily basis, serving their consumers and delivering on their value propositions as what I think of as we are a B2C for B business. So we serve consumers on behalf of businesses.
Right. So everything from a full course meal to a hot dog to a cocktail. That's really great.
That's exactly right.
So before we talk about some of the core business, I'm super curious. You see this title a lot nowadays, Chief Transformation Officer, Chief Digital Officer. And I think for me, I'm super curious about like what that role is, what your journey to the role was, and why do you think Chief Transformation Officers are really important right now?
So time will tell if we're adding value, or if those of me and my peers in these types of roles are adding value. But for Sodexo and for our industry, which is away from home food service and facilities management and personal home care, the idea of transforming is not an option. You know, if you think about Sodexo, this is equivalent to we're Blockbuster, and Netflix has come out with DVDs in the mail, right? And so now we are getting massively disrupted. And what are we going to do about it? And are we going to become obsolete within the next decade? Or are we going to invent and transform and actually be the leaders in what is next, so that Netflix with DVD by mail is actually the obsolete thing in the next decade?
Are you talking about the virus making us work separately, or are you talking about like communal meal service is being now just limited to institutions, or are you delivering home meals? Like what is the source of that disruption, do you think?
First of all, it is not just because of the pandemic and coronavirus. Absolutely, that accelerated the change, but this change was already happening before. If I give you a few examples, tangible examples, if we think about at US universities and student meal plans, the whole concept of a student going to their cafeteria on their campus and locked into a meal plan where they need to, they're getting served food. It's already sounds old fashioned, to be honest. It's not that it's going to completely go away, but what is the future of serving students on campus when students have those other options that they're tapping into, like Uber Eats and Grubhub? And I can talk to you about what's happening there, but you can see how, regardless of the pandemic, that transformation is already happening. Now, when we think about food service and feeding and serving employees in office buildings, that absolutely, the pandemic has added like a new twist to it, where now work from home, hybrid working is now, I think, here to stay, and in my opinion. So what does food service, well, how does feeding employees look like in the future? Again, another change, yes, accelerated by COVID, but not just because of COVID.
So technology has a front and center role there. You know, my background, I spent a little bit of time at Uber, so I'm sorry to be the one of the people who helps do that. But what are the challenges for the workforce? I want to talk a little bit about the impact on the workforce and your catering workforce, right? So if you have all these folks that are traditionally cooking, making these meals and serving them in a kind of a brick and mortar, now perhaps some of that food gets to deliver to the home because that's where the workers are. Can you talk a little bit about what the challenges you see right now for those workers in the workforce and how you think technology can help you, perhaps, given the fact that it's been such a big disruptor?
First of all, we have an incredibly diverse workforce. I think more diverse than most large US employers. We have over 100,000 employees. And when I think about diversity, I think about the socioeconomic status, the level of education, the technical abilities, language, geographical diversity of our workforce. We run the gamut, right? And if we think about, and this is our community. We have an obligation to. We're not just here to serve our clients and consumers. We're here to, in fact, me and I think our whole Sodexo leadership team, we only exist to enable, empower, and support our workforce who does the real work, actually. And what are the challenges that our workforce is facing, our people are facing right now? First, we talk about what I alluded to before, which is that our industry and what we are leading at Sodexo is a lot of innovative change, right? How we are serving consumers, how we're using technology to do that, our offers, what food we're serving, that's changing. At the same time, there are things that are out of our control, these market dynamics that are also changing and that are incredibly challenging to deal with right now. Number one, you can imagine, is supply chain and inflation, right? 6 months ago, we were having trouble just getting orders filled and getting the right food at the right sites. And so our workforce was struggling with that. Now, if we think about inflation, which is at the forefront of, I think, every business and every industry, one of the biggest categories that's facing inflationary pressures is food, particularly proteins. And you can imagine how big of a part of our business is serving and cooking proteins. So managing all of that while at the same time innovating and changing the way that we are delivering and serving food and supporting our consumers. So doing it all at once is incredibly difficult, which actually requires us to make some strategic bets because we can't do everything everywhere and do it all very well. So we're at Sodexo, we are doing two things. We're being very selective about what we're doing. And we're also focusing, I think we might get to this a little bit later, but we're also focusing on how to reduce any burden of our workforce and using technology to actually just eliminate non-value added tasks and asks of them so that they have the bandwidth and hopefully some capacity to be able to manage all this change at once.
I also want to talk a little bit about the non-food related businesses. I saw that, surprising to me, you have a personal home care business as well. And that's kind of one of the verticals that Schedulo has focused on for helping folks in all manner of ways in their home to stay healthy, get the treatment that they need, but not necessarily bring them into a clinic or a facility. And that shifting is also occurring. As much as work is shifting to the home, now you have families that perhaps are going to keep mom at home as opposed to putting her in a nursing facility. So now there's more burden on the caregiver to serve food and care for her. Can you talk a little bit about the non-food related services and how that kind of connects up to the other businesses and what challenges those businesses are kind of experiencing these days?
So you actually used a word in your question that is exactly how we think about it. They all connect, all of our services. So we have food service, which actually there's a wide variety of food service, including feeding sick patients in hospitals to university meal plans to serving hot dogs at sports stadiums. We have facilities management, which runs the gamut from cleaning and janitorial all the way to technical asset management within large facilities. Then we have our personal home care business, which is a lot of actual supporting people at home. And like exactly like you mentioned, a lot of those communities and our clients that we're serving there are sick or are elderly. And in a way, that connectivity between all those services is how we can add value and how we can really bring a continuum of care and a continuum of service to our clients, all the way from newborn babies in hospitals, just right down the street from me at Stanford Children's Care, to K through 12 schools. We have a big presence in public schools in the US, universities, office buildings, manufacturing sites, sports stadiums, and then senior living home, and then personal and home care. And so in that way, we think about our continuum of services and supporting consumers at every stage of their lives. And there's parts of our businesses that are a little bit less service intensive than others. So if we think about technical asset management in a large campus, and those are the areas where, change is relatively a little bit easier. You can implement new processes, use technology. When we think about all of these service, human, labor-intensive businesses, that is where technology is mission critical, but it's not. There's no flipping of switches. It's it's all about change management and making sure that we're not using a one-size-fits-all approach. So when we start to talk about how technology can support those challenges, the answer is different for all different aspects of our business. But yes, it's with a very human business, the decision of what technology to use, how to implement it, how to test and learn is incredibly more complex than doing it in more of our asset or digitally enabled businesses.
Because I would imagine that as you, the key player in that room that decides technology A, technology B, you've got to place a bet on what technology you're going to implement, where you're going to implement it, what business you're going to implement it. We'll talk a little bit about that after the break, but I'm super curious about that. So we're going to take a little break. We'll be right back. At Schedulo, we're on a mission to serve the 2.7 billion workers and those who employ them that don't regularly work from a desk. We know it can be complicated to manage a deskless workforce, but employees and customers, they don't need to know that. The Deskless Productivity Cloud from Schedulo enables any organization to schedule, manage, engage, and analyze their mobile workforce. To learn more, visit schedulo.com. So welcome back. Today, my guest is Brent Bloomberg. He's the Chief Transformation Officer at Sodexo North America. So we were talking a little bit about how technology has transformed every business. It's always transforming every business. And that's kind of your role, is to shepherd that transformation in a way that supports the business, avoid some landmines, predict some disruption, respond to the disruption, and keep the business growing and centered, and also supporting your workforce that's experiencing just as much challenge as we are as folks who work from a desk.
Or one might even argue more challenges than we are.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. They've been challenged the most because they probably have the least amount of agency in the whole equation, right? So I want to shift gears a little bit and have you give me some examples of some initiatives. And what are some of the examples of those initiatives you're working on or have worked on that have helped your workforce kind of respond to some of these disruptions that we were talking a little bit about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to share. And some of them might directly address some of the challenges. Others are tangential to them, but critically important. And I'll actually start with a tangential example, in fact. Just like I think the rest of large employers, we have gone back to the drawing board on our employee value proposition. And why would someone work for us, work for Sodexo, and it's particularly for our frontline workforce that are on client sites serving patients and students and office workers? What's the value proposition for them? And one big aspect of that is career mobility. And so what we're thinking of and what we're now trying to deliver to our community, to our workforce, is a value proposition where what they are doing today, the roles that they're in today, is just an entry point to this wide network of roles and career levels that they can aspire to be at Sodexo. And Sodexo, we can help support them as they and help them navigate and grow their careers at Sodexo. And thinking of our frontline workforce as talent, a big, great pool of talent that already is now reflected in our leadership team and should even more so be reflected in our leadership team in the future. So that's one example.
Very, very interesting, because I think that's a different way to think about employer-employee relationships, and the employee has more agency now. And so they're deciding which place that they're going to go with, whether they're just going to get a job serving food, or do they want to join with a company that can maybe help them grow their career in hospitality and grow into a real career for their kids and for their family. So that's really, it's not only heartful, but it's actually makes a lot of sense, because now people can choose. They have a little bit more. I would argue they have a lot more agency in terms of where they're going to spend their time.
Exactly. I think an old school concept is to think about blue and white collar employees. Well, there's this new concept now, a term you might have heard of, which is new collar employees. And so now also there's this new generation that expects that of their employer, that there are options, there's flexibility, and that there's not one set way to do things. So that's one really big example, one example of how we're trying to support our workforce.
That's really foundational. Tell me about some other stuff you're working on.
Yeah, so another one that we're working on that continues to be complex, but is labor scheduling, which might sound familiar to you. It's scheduling.
A little familiar.
But work planning. And so how many people we need at each site at different times of the day, what talent we need where. So in order to optimize for Sodexo, but then also to optimize for our workforce, how do we give our workforce the right tools, the right modes of communication, the right flexibility, so that they can also optimize for themselves. And so that the dynamic nature of our scheduling and needs at different sites can also can be a source of flexibility rather than a constraint, both for us and for our workforce. So that's another big one. There's so much untapped potential there, I think, in the industry, in the food service industry, because what we can't do is think about, if we take any zip code, we've probably got 5 to 10 sites in that zip code. And so we can't think about each site as, all right, we need to make sure who's commuting to that site, where else can they go that's within the vicinity, at which different times of the day. Think about another example of universities, if we go back to that one. The amount of demand in the summertime is significantly lower, in fact, than the demand.
So what do you do with those workers?
Exactly.
But how do you keep the relationship going so you don't have to go get new people, but say, hey, we can move that workforce around and make it more friendly for them to work this shift?
Exactly. And so we have Sodexo Live, which is our sports and leisure business that manages and runs food service in stadiums across the US. We did the NCAA this year in New Orleans. That's something that picks up quite a bit during the summer. And so we are really tapping into the complexity and the dynamic nature of our scheduling and labor force needs. Is it actually an advantage both for us and for our workforce? And so we're working on tapping into that with technology, as you can imagine. Yeah.
You see a lot about this in the news related to how workers feel about their work environment, and it drove some changes to the way Starbucks even schedules their employees, how much space they give between the schedule and the actual publication of the workday. So they had it down to 2 days, and the employees were like, no, you can't do that to me. You got to give me at least 2 weeks notice to tell me where I'm going to be, if I'm going to work a morning shift or an afternoon shift. I think a lot of the movements to unionize some large employers now have moved in that direction, I think, and scheduling is almost always in those articles. You see it to say scheduling was an issue in the negotiations, and people just want to have more agency over their life, right? I have to be optimistic about how technology can solve some of these challenges. So how do you think technology can help you solve some of those challenges?
So one thing to share is that in my role, it's actually not an assumption that, in my role as leading transformation, that it is about tech and data and information and systems. But in fact, it permeates throughout every single thing that we do. I don't think it's an option if we want to move fast or actually have legitimate offers today and in the future to not use technology. I'd love to give an example, for instance. Let's go back to that university campus example, which is relatable to many of us, perhaps. We started with a problem statement or an opportunity statement, which is our students on campus want the flexibility of food, of what they're eating and where they're eating it. And we started with this challenge of, okay, well, we've invested a lot of infrastructure in these cafeterias on these university campuses, right? And we've got our whole labor force, in fact, that is geared towards that cafeteria. And so what do you do with that? And so one example is we've partnered with a company called KiwiBot that uses these robots to deliver food, autonomously deliver food from the cafeteria to students wherever they are on campus, classroom, dorm, wherever. And then now we've rolled this out. I think we're on track to be in hundreds of our university campuses by the end of this year. Now, I'm not saying that that's a silver bullet. Now that's solved all problems, but it's just one example of how we've used technology now to evolve our offer, to upgrade our offer and our value proposition. But then that absolutely, the first thing it goes back to, what is mission critical, is how does it work for our workforce? Because now if you think about our workforce that did not have to think about a robot or logistics of any sort outside of the cafeteria.
The logistics, breaking that unit down instead of a half sheet, now you've got to individualize the serving.
Exactly.
And keep it hot and safe and deliver it within a specific period of time, because now everybody's has on demand in their brain with regard to food, whereas it was more like the supply is there, you go where the food is.
Absolutely.
The food comes to you.
Yeah, David. And so this is where, you're going to tell me I'm breaking the rules of how an interview works, but
it's fine.
Okay. I think this KiwiBot example, this autonomous robot for food delivery example is a great example of we need to make sure that our workforces they're going to be more technical, more creative, and more connected in the future and today. It's already starting. More technical because now if we think about our labor force, they need to understand and work with technology, some of it that's fledgling technology that is still in beta phase today, like these robots. More creative because there's no one size fits all, and because what we're going to, there's a little bit of test and learn, a little bit of agility that's required because it's not a proven system yet, and we're going to have to adjust it as we go. And more connected because now our workforce is connecting with students not just when they walk through the cafeteria doors, but wherever they are on campus, and we need to have a keen understanding of that.
I think that's a really powerful example because it kind of demonstrates, hey, you have this piece of technology now that actually needs to be also maintained in the field. So now you're not only creating, serving, providing safe, nutritious meals on time that are good for folks, but you also now have this other piece of technology that you never really had before. You had ovens and knives and spoons and trucks. Now you have robots. So now your mission is extended into kind of a whole new world. And you probably need employees to actually manage that side of the business as well, and they need to be more creative. And now I can kind of see how that might provide a career path now, right? So you're not just in the kitchen. Now you can come to the front, and you can actually even go all the way to working with the technology that gets that food out. Super interesting. So talk a little bit about the future. So what do you think employees want? What do you think their needs are, and that you want to start preparing for today as you move forward in the business?
First of all, that's the right question to ask. It's the one that we ask ourselves all the time, and we don't just ask ourselves. In fact, we ask our workforce, and we make sure that we're as connected as possible with the field. Think about it as the field, the front line. One thing that I've learned, it's been an aha for me over the last year and a half in this role, is that not one size fits all. We spoke a little bit earlier about the incredible diversity of our workforce. And so when we think about the future and how does the future of workforce empowerment look like, it's not one thing, because it's going to differ for our Gen Z workforce that might actually be wanting to connect on, I'm making this sound silly, but connect on
maybe TikTok. They want to work on their robots,
exactly.
But you still have a healthy amount of people who don't want to do that.
Exactly,
right?
but not just what they're working on, but how we're connecting with them, right? Is it via mobile? Is it through social media? Is it over fax? Probably not anymore, but just jesting.
You'd be surprised.
but yes, it's how we connect with them, what employee benefits we give to them, what aspects of our value proposition is important to them. All is this not one size fits all. So we actually need to make sure that we continue to have a playbook, a menu of solutions, and again, test and learn with some of these things, because I'll even attest to over the last 8 months, we've had a few initiatives that we were planning on them being resounding success. The initiatives that were technology driven for our workforce and that were not successful. But so we need it, and it's going to happen again and again. We're going to have to continue to.
You can't succeed until you fail. You got to know.
Exactly.
You got to put the test out there. John Doerr is very famous for saying, I invest in 100 companies knowing that only 3 of them are going to succeed. But the goal is over time, you get a better rate.
The tricky thing with that, which is absolutely correct, we have to test, we have to be agile. It's not set it and forget it. But at the same time, we have to be so careful with it, because we're not talking about a system where you're just tweaking a variable and seeing how the algorithm changes. We're talking about humans, we're talking about people, we're talking about hospital patients, university students, K through 12 students that are on free and reduced lunches. So we have to be incredibly intentional and selective on what we're testing and where. And when we partner very closely with our clients, which are other businesses, to make sure that what we're doing, if it is not proven, it's done in we're mitigating all the risks when we're testing it. So it's an incredibly important part of our business, because we're talking about just a very human business.
Well, this has been so enlightening. I really want to thank my guest today, Brent Bloomberg, Chief Transformation Officer for Sodexo North America, SODEXO. And I also wanted to thank our host here at Studio Pod Media in beautiful Mission District of San Francisco. And I hope you have a great weekend, Brent, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, David. I'd love to.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Modern Workforce, the podcast for deskless workforce innovators by Schedulo. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast